Hello and welcome to Get the Table, another wrestling roundtable discussion podcast with myself, Adam Wilborn, and the Dadley Boyz of WhatCulture, Michael Hamflett and Michael Sidgwick, here to discuss another burning wrestling issue. But before we get into it, if you're a fan of this sort of thing, make sure you subscribe to WhatCulture Wrestling on either iTunes, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts from, for daily wrestling podcasts where we review Raw, SmackDown, the Wednesday night war between AEW and NXT, pay-per-views, we have interviews, roundtable discussions, and a roundup of the week, complete with a bloody good quiz, of course, on WrestleCulture. As I said, though, joined by Michael Hamflett and Michael Sidgwick. And gents, we are gathered here today to discuss the fallout of WrestleMania 36, and in particular, who suffered the most as a result of that 2-day surreal extravaganza. Michael Hamflett, when I talk about people suffering at WrestleMania 36, who immediately pops in your head?
Becky Lynch and Shayna Baszler. The match that felt like a dream around Survivor Series time became a nightmare for all sorts of reasons as it actually approached WrestleMania. The build wasn't great before WWE lost the crowds and then didn't particularly get any better, not least because Becky Lynch was given this giant truck that they'd by this point spent money on that seemed more important than getting over than the program. The match, I was going to say played out to silence, but what I mean there is like that it played out to sort of the online disinterest from people. You couldn't feel much buzz like while it was happening or after the fact. There was nothing really to grab onto. People were pissed off with the finish when a month earlier they'd been pissed off with Shayna Baszler in general. So it was hard to read how they could have booked it in a way that would have satisfied everybody. And now they both feel more irrelevant than they did before on Raw. Becky Lynch feels like she hasn't got any contenders left, but doesn't quite know how to use her character in that world. Shayna Baszler already feels beaten down by the rigors of the main roster rather than somebody ready to rebound, as she would have done when they did this in NXT. The Raw women's division, like as of the Raw after WrestleMania, was more interesting when we were looking at the trajectories of Asuka and Liv Morgan than Becky Lynch and Shayna Baszler, and that doesn't feel ideal at all.
Yeah, I didn't come out of that match feeling particularly enthused about the future of Shayna Baszler, the character of Becky Lynch, the absolute plight, and that is the word, not state, plight of that Raw women's division in the SmackDown one isn't any better. In fact, you could argue that it's worse. If you think back to the Ronda Rousey program, I know a lot of people thought it got convoluted and the payoff wasn't particularly great, but if nothing else, if the execution let it down, it felt big time. It felt like it warranted that main event of WrestleMania. If you go back just a few months prior to that, Evolution is one of my favorite WWE pay-per-views of all time. It genuinely felt like a genuine celebration of women's wrestling in WWE. It felt like they were all so keen for that moment. It felt like the audience was just as keen right there with them. It just felt like the corner had been turned. There was parity with the men's division in sight, and by that I mean match quality, which is pretty much assured at that point, but in terms of importance, maybe even roster size, it felt like the start of something and the celebration of something that had come before, and it's all gone to piss. Women's wrestling is in WWE on that main roster is really not great. It's not great at all. It's probably as bad as it's been since the days of those weird sort of Team Bad factions. And piss off for doing a callback to that, by the way. That was a total joke in that SmackDown match. And it just feels like this match at WrestleMania did absolutely nothing to arrest what is, in my opinion, a slide. Couldn't care less about Shayna Baszler now. As a fan myself, but if I'm looking at the optics of what the audience must think of her, they just think that she's just this all talk. Just completely all talk. They must be getting tired of Becky Lynch. I think the lack of buzz, as Hamflett points out, bears all this out. It was just really a waste of everyone's time, this entire bloody program.
I've said this before, but that result out of everything that happened at WrestleMania made me apoplectic. I tweeted as such on the night, and but people seem to reflect that sort of opinion too, because I was so confident that Shayna Baszler was such an obvious story beat to make of, I said this before, Becky Lynch being Rocky in Rocky 3, where she lets everything go to her head and then finally has to realize that she has to, go back to her roots to recover her Raw Women's Championship after Shayna Baszler takes it off her. I was so confident that was going to happen. I basically had the tweet I was going to send out after the match finished ready to go. And then Becky Lynch reversed the Kirifuda clutch and got the most ridiculous pinfall, a pinfall that Shayna's been got with 3 times now, including her time in NXT.
We made the joke. Sorry, Wilbon. We made the joke about this feud being the Drew McIntyre pig gag that we'd kept doing with The Simpsons. It's still good. It's still good. It's still good. By the end, by that finish, it was just, it's gone. It's definitely gone. Like, there was no way in sight for it to come back, was there?
No, it was ridiculous. And, I was furious about her not winning the Royal Rumble, but I accepted that Charlotte Flair challenging for the NXT Women's Championship kind of needed something like that. And then the make good that they had at the Elimination Chamber, as much as it pissed fans off, I thought was sensational. And then, they kept reminding everyone of the bite, which I was kind of hoping they were just going to sort of gloss over as a bit of something to pop a rating and get the audience's attention. And then, this woman who was just unstoppable in NXT, as you mentioned, Michael Hamflett, with the help of the horsewomen at times, but nevertheless, just an absolute killer, gets beaten on the biggest stage. And yes, they're saying, well, there's probably going to be a rematch, and I've suggested that maybe she should win Money in the Bank. But you can't say that Shayna Baszler's star has not been affected by all this, because I thought you could have had her win it and, even build to a rematch between Becky and Shayna at next year's WrestleMania, or, a year-long story of redemption for Becky Lynch after holding the title for nearly a year. And now, as Sidgwick, as you mentioned, the barren landscape of the Raw women's title challenges is there for all to see. And it feels like now we're either waiting for Ronda Rousey to return or, as you said, Michael Hamflett, the horsewomen to come up and help Shayna, which just makes her look a weaker champion than she already would have. But anyway, let's move on. Michael Sidgwick, who else suffered the most at WrestleMania 36?
Have I got 2 more picks? Or however many I want?
As many as you want.
Okay, I'll talk all night. I'll talk all day. There was a head of Super Showdown. In my opinion, I know I felt a little bit of it, even though I do really like Goldberg. But I think the Fiend character, and what an absolute subversion this is, but the Fiend character for me had become so farcical, and I just refused to take it seriously. And I just thought it was goofy and wacky and all the rest of it. There was kind of a performative, contrarian element among the wrestling fandom that was split between those who liked and who disliked the Fiend in support of Goldberg at Super Showdown. And he made a complete arse of himself. His performance was pathetic. And I think people were a little bit kinder to it because they were relieved that this Fiend character that had kind of become a joke in a lot of people's eyes had in fact lost. That sentiment was exposed as being, yes, performative and contrarian in the build to WrestleMania because no one seemed to really care about Goldberg versus Roman Reigns. Obviously, that match did not happen. And that match with Braun Strowman at WrestleMania 36 or whatever it was called was just so piss poor, man. It was so piss poor. There was an attempt with the Drew Brock match, which is very similar, to do something else. Drew bumped really hard for the German. Brock gave him the F5 kick out at 1, which was so much neater, I think, and better than having Roman Reigns take it 8 times or however many times it was 2 years ago. But I just thought with Goldberg, the bloom was completely off the rose at WrestleMania 36. I just never got the sense that this meant a damn thing. I didn't really get it with Drew versus Brock either, but I think a lot of that was circumstances. And I didn't like the match layout. But if you'd played out that story of Drew and Brock in a stadium, I think it would have gone down really well. If myself, personally, I would have mourned the lack of a 15-minute beef slapper. But with Goldberg versus Braun Strowman, I just thought it was crap. I thought the execution of the few moves they did was rubbish. I thought it was 50-50, but like consecutively. So it didn't even have the easiest route to drama you could possibly ever take and do my turn, your turn, my turn. And they just took it in turns to do one half of a match and then another. I thought it was so lazy. I thought it was so bankrupt. And I think even the contrarians who were in support of Goldberg, they've quietened down, much like I have. The casual audience is another matter. I know that he pulled loads of people into SmackDown, hence why he actually had the leverage to go over the Fiend in the end. But within our bubble, at least, I don't think there will be any clamours for Goldberg to come back.
And wrestling's a dance, isn't it? And all of that had a knock-on effect to Braun Strowman coming out of the show. There was no talk on Braun Strowman winning his first Universal title. That goddamn belt, man, is cursed, isn't it? Like, that has had the worst histories, but we are told to feel that it's the top title along with the WWE title that Brock had. And Strowman felt like a paper champion for beating another paper champion in an environment that felt unreal. He walked around the ring saying it was the monster's moment or whatever he was screaming to who or what, I don't know, because there was nobody there to scream it to. And I suppose if you want to be generous, you can have admiration from trying to make a moment where there wasn't one. But, you know, who particularly do you even want to see Strowman face? I think the general consensus was there was just as much justification to keep the belt on Goldberg in these circumstances as there was to take it off him. And that's an indictment of Braun Strowman, considering that he was slapped into that graphic with 48 hours to go. There should have been that typical, oh my God, this match is happening. I can't believe we're getting this. Braun Strowman. And instead it was like, maybe it's just logical to keep it on Goldberg. He's not working anyway. You know, it's just I don't think he's in that great a position because there wasn't anyone there to put him over to put, you know, that it wasn't an elevation winning that title, was it?
It's also ironic that you say it was chucked in 48 hours beforehand. It was 24 hours beforehand. It was the night before, and they didn't even explain it. They just had Michael. I genuinely was watching SmackDown and just thought, have I missed a segment where they explained why Roman was out, you know, whether it be in storyline or in real life? And no, they just went, don't forget, tomorrow, Braun Strowman versus Goldberg, as we've all been saying, for the Universal Championship. I was going to ask.
Remember what Triple H said? It will play out in a unique manner. My favorite narrative about Triple H at the minute, right, is that I reckon there was probably a draft plan, or I reckon even something was recorded. And time again, you see it on the conference calls that he does before the takeover events. He gets asked questions where he has a clear plan in place or a clear idea of the answer to the question in the best case scenario, and he has to put the caveat subtext every single time, unless that old tosser father-in-law ruins it. Then yes, this will happen. It is what it is, or it'll be, or we'll see. We'll see is one of his favorite sort of things, and Vince has done it again. He's absolutely done it again. He's probably just gone, nope, don't like this. Our audience are idiots, and they don't care. So let's just do whatever I want to do and just brush it under the carpet. Fantastic. Triple H honestly must hate him. He must hate him at this point.
It's going to be a brilliant extra, isn't it, on the network documentary about this era of WWE when we finally see what was supposed to happen to get Braun Strowman in that match, because something's been shot. I'm certain something's been shot and cut together, and then, as you say, Vince has just Vinced it at the very last minute. It's magic, man. Like, of all the people to hang in a situation like this, it's Triple H as well, so it's win-win.
It's numerous things popped into my head when you reminded me of that. Number one was the meme of, you keep saying that word and I don't think you know what it means. And he's not wrong, and it is unique. And then there was also Vince just going, were they saying Roman or Strowman? Let's talk a little bit about Rhea Ripley here, Michael Hamflett, because she was unfortunate to lose the NXT Women's Championship to Charlotte Flair, but you could sort of understand it because WWE probably want more eyes on the NXT product. Charlotte may well bring that, even if past history does not demonstrate that. And also, subsequent reports coming out in the last few days about Rhea having to go back to Australia, sort her visa situation out, and therefore obviously missed quite a bit of telly, kind of justify it. Did she still suffer at WrestleMania, or in a few months' time when she returns, will her stock have been increased because of such a great match that she had with Charlotte?
Yeah, I think however we were to analyze this news about her visa does trump a lot of that conversation. They were ultimately probably forced to have to make that decision. How I received that as a fan shouldn't apply. I didn't think it was ideal, but I didn't think it was a disaster either. This comes from a kind of blanket trust of the belt that Charlotte's now wearing around her waist. That title's one of the most prestigious in all of wrestling. That division's one of the best in all of wrestling. NXT tries its hardest to look after that division especially. And I just thought that even if they were forced into making that decision, because were working on the assumption that there was absolutely no chance that Rhea Ripley had a chance of getting that paperwork in order with everything in the world closing down around them. This is probably a best case scenario. Losing, thank God she wasn't booked against somebody that wouldn't have felt remotely believable against. If it had just been a takeover match against Mia Yim or something, and they had no choice but to take a title offer because of a visa issue, that would have been a disaster. This loss to Charlotte Flair is entirely recoverable. Asuka didn't do it by booking. Asuka did it by being just the best. But Rhea Ripley is in a arm of WWE that can get her there by booking. And I think the rematches will be great, or I think Rhea Ripley's redemption will be just fine. You could even argue that she was perhaps too confident and too cocksure against Charlotte. And the NXT Women's title is better booked with a long-standing heel champion for the big babyface moment. I think she'll probably be all right.
I'm worried about Rhea Ripley. Not worried because, realistically, just the way they book their babyface top stars just repels me. It repels me. And it's been kind of repelling me with Rhea Ripley. And this feels like yet another beat that's like super, super familiar at this point. If they don't love the word moment enough, they also love the word redemption and redemption stories. And it just feels like from that moment where she challenged Shayna Baszler with absolutely zero fear, without one lame quip, without really doing an entrance, I can't recall. She just went up and just said, "I'm the biggest bitch in this yard now. You're gonna have to deal with me. I'm Rhea Ripley." To get to a point now where she felt more dangerous in NXT UK or more relevant or a hotter prospect in NXT UK than NXT proper is a huge indictment. Just feels like they're hitting a few beats. They're hitting just had a few zingers at the expense of Charlotte Flair on Raw in the build. She had the starry-eyed. Look at the size of the stadium that I'm going to be performing in. Not the fact that it's about the match. It's all look at the stadium. And then she has the narrow defeat from which she must be redeemed. Just feels like very familiar narrative ground. And she's not as cool as she was, if you want to get very succinct about it. She doesn't feel as cool as she was. And that's what the WWE process ultimately, to everybody's detriment, achieves. So I'm worried about Rhea Ripley. I really am.
We're talking about people who suffered as a result of WrestleMania 36. People who suffered at WrestleMania 36 are people like Seth Rollins and AJ Styles. We'll get to John Cena, don't worry, in due course. But Michael Sidgwick, out of Styles and Rollins, who's going to come out of Mania looking better?
Both of them looked amazing coming out of WrestleMania, in my opinion, given where their stocks were, particularly in the summer of last year. Seth Rollins was a complete and utter punchline of his own making with his Twitter activity, his level of work. Obviously, the caveat was that he was working Baron Corbin, so you couldn't really take it too seriously, but he was a 3-star special, an idiot on Twitter. He was public enemy number one amongst wrestling fans. He's come out with this Kevin Owens feud looking amazing. I thought the match was really, really committed. It worked as well as a match could in an empty arena. Thought his promo work in the weeks beforehand were excellent. I'm one of his biggest detractors, Seth Rollins. I genuinely am. And I thought he's never looked as good as this in a long, long time. I think it was a huge, huge boost for his career to master the storyline as he had. And similarly with AJ Styles, he was well past his best last year in those matches with Ricochet. They were very slow. They weren't very good. I can't really remember what else he did throughout the remainder of that year. It was nowhere near his best. In fact, it was probably his worst. And what struck me about that Boneyard match, even though I don't like it because I don't like The Undertaker, he's a Republican, Nazi, Blue Lives Matter bastard. Don't like him. Don't like his corny Clint Eastwood impression, right? Don't like him. Loved his streak work. Don't like the American Badass, right? It's a clear delineation. 1997 Taker, great. 2000s Taker, great. Clint Eastwood Taker, piss off. But what struck me about the Boneyard match, which wasn't to my tastes, I was very impressed by AJ Styles in it. He didn't do one aerial maneuver. He didn't do one of his signature maneuvers I can't even recall. Ultimately, he punched someone, took some punches, and acted. And if you consider what the whole idea of AJ Styles was back in TNA, this is almost the complete opposite. And his performance in that, whatever it was, a match, a spectacle, a short film, whatever, like what an all-rounder he has become. And what a marvelous illustration the Boneyard match was of that. So I think both of those have come out great.
Rollins, to me, especially, is feeling like the comeback story of the year. Um, I'm a big fan of wrestling gear, but it wasn't just that beautiful, resplendent white gear that like looked amazing. It felt like a full-on comeback. Well, I know Sidgwick's just rightfully like panned redemption arcs, but this felt like the culmination of one. Like such a good angle from the embers of one that already felt stubbed out at Christmas. I was really in awe of caring about like Seth Rollins again and the work he'd done to do that, and Owens too. Also thought AJ wouldn't hurt for AJ to have a rest in peace for a little bit off the back of that. He was left under the dirt, and that heel character with the Good Brothers is well played out. He's slowing down in the ring now, so his matches mean a little bit less than they used to. AJ Styles, more than plenty, would deserve the spot of a special attraction pro wrestler, because he could save all his big spots for one match every few months. I don't think that WWE would want to book him like that. It doesn't feel like Vince McMahon's instincts to not want to make the use of that big fat contract they offered him while he's still full-time and willing to do it every week on Raw. But I would love if this signposted the start of a bit of a part-time era for AJ. Certainly now. Certainly, if anyone can sell something like the loss of a Boneyard match while there's empty arenas, it's Styles.
Right, we've gone on long enough without talking about John Cena, and I'm not saying that he suffered in a particular way in terms of his stock being diminished, because arguably I've never wanted to see him return to WWE more than after the Firefly Funhouse match. But Michael Hamflett, what do you think the future holds for someone like him, and are we going to see that much anticipated but never appearing just yet heel turn?
I don't know. I mean, it would be quite something after all of that, after finally learning his lessons, if he came out and no-sold it like it was 2010 all over again. Oh, I lost at WrestleMania, guys. So I would hate for them to rely on those base instincts. John Cena needs to not be around for a long, long, long time. I've enjoyed his comebacks for the most part when he doesn't get in the way of mid-carders too much. I think that comeback that actually started the Bray Wyatt WrestleMania match, he was so over. And I know it was in Boston, but it felt like the first time in years he'd just been universally received as a babyface. He has now developed, the audience now have developed that affection for him as a returning legend that they're bored of with the Attitude Era guys. So it's quite nice to see him slotting into that role. I don't want to see John Cena for about a year for the next WrestleMania build. It would be such a reward to those Fiend fans who tried to tell us that dancing Braun Strowman had been impacted by his interaction with the Fiend. If John Cena came back for his WrestleMania match in 12 months' time and he was still feeling the impacts of this, if he still wasn't quite feeling himself, and if he put over some guy, if he put over next year's Ted DiBiase Jr. in a match where like the young pup needs the win, The Miz would sort of be a perfect candidate now, I think, because he never gets to go over John Cena. But John Cena ain't himself no more. That would actually determine that character to be a success. The last thing I want is for Smiling Cena to appear. I don't even really want to see. I'm going to avoid his Instagram. I'm going to avoid when he's promoting his films and things like that, because I want to buy in to what I watched on Sunday.
Yeah, I would be not devastated, not that much of a mark, but I'd be pissed off if they betrayed the power, and that is the word. That was such a powerful story, such a shocking abundance of self-awareness they showed in telling that story. I thought it was absolutely fantastic. Yeah, I think it's the weirdest thing, because he's come out of that. Essentially, they've acknowledged that if he's not an overt heel in the aftermath of it, as a consequence of it, there's been a big part of him that you cannot ignore that has been a bit of a dickhead heel this entire time. And I'd love to see that shocking admission inform whatever he does next. But it's the oddest thing, because he could theoretically turn heel after this. He's not needed as that babyface merch seller anymore, because the power of that babyface merch seller has turned WWE into what it is now. But I would love to see John Cena own this in some way when he does in fact come back. But the problem is that he can't really turn overt heel, because his performance in that match, if anything, is going to strengthen this resolve to have him as a universal babyface. Because I know Hamflett mentioned the Boston reaction, which was really, really strong. He was universally cheered at WrestleMania 35 as a doctor of thugonomics. But even before then, he came out for, was it Raw Reunion or Raw 25? when he came out and did a segment with the Usos and he did an ill-advised joke.
Yeah, last year Raw 25, I think. No, it must have been Raw Reunion. Raw Reunion, sorry, yeah.
He was the most universally beloved part of that. He was apart from that off-color joke that upset people quite rightfully, in my opinion. He was really, really well received. I think in the audience, there wasn't the boo yeah thing. It was just, oh, John Cena's back, and I'm sorry for ever booing you, John. You're a big star, and the years. This isn't me. I never liked John Cena, and that's why the Firefly Funhouse match really resonated with me so much. But in terms of the fan reaction, on the night that belatedly, he kind of turned heel in that Firefly Funhouse match. It won't matter for now because, if anything, the respect that he's got is just gonna go through the roof.
Finally, any other names we need to very quickly mention who suffered at WrestleMania 36, Michael Hamflet?
Sorry, Wilborn. I don't want the smoke ever again. I don't want to see the Street Profits for months. I kind of blame the WrestleMania rematch that we got 3 times on Raw on Monday for that as well. But there's been a lot of Street Profits in this empty arena era. I don't want to see Montez Ford taking bumps like that ever again, for no crowd, for no pop. I think the act has worn itself out, and WrestleMania was telling of that because the match was meaningless already. And then it becomes about the wrestlers who, again, I feel awful criticizing them for even having to work in these circumstances. But it does come down to the wrestlers having more in them to make these matches interesting. And I didn't think any of them were. And the whole presentation had a detrimental effect on Bianca Belair, who I've got far more stock in than the Street Profits to begin with. So I don't know. I can't bear to watch them. They are becoming the emblem of this particular era of WWE, and nobody should have to carry that anchor when this is all past. Nobody.
Sige? For me, it's a strange one because it's not going to matter with the audience at all. But I think Edge and Randy Orton for me, I've got little interest in Edge going forward as much as I did at the Royal Rumble. But I do think against another younger, faster, more rapid pro wrestler, more dynamic, we could see way more out of Edge than the circumstances allowed on Sunday night. But Randy Orton, I was hesitant to get really excited about the match, even when we thought it was going to be at Raymond James Stadium, just because it's Randy Orton. And God damn it, it's such a shame that he's become an engaging TV character after so many years, when his work is just absolutely putrid and it's been improved upon by orders of magnitude by the worldwide standard. I will never, ever again get worked into thinking a Randy Orton program could be good, because ultimately the match has to be good, and the match will never be good because Randy Orton's in the match.
I completely agree, although I guarantee in about 9-10 months' time,
yeah, you will.
I'm going to get worked straight back into it again. One final thing I think we have to mention here, should I say people who suffered the most at WrestleMania 36, other than the fans, of course, is every WrestleMania guest host not named Titus O'Neil. Hurrah, hurrah, hurrah. I'm starting the campaign right now that Titus Worldwide,
you're not.
The brand,
You're just saying words,
has to host WrestleMania 37. Even if The Rock says he'll do it for free. I'm sorry, but the face Titus O'Neil pulled after the Firefly Funhouse match could not be pulled off by Dwayne The Rock Johnson. So, Titus Worldwide, Titus O'Neil hosting WrestleMania 37. I thought he did a stellar job when that prick Gronk won the 24/7 title. Bollocks, whatever that was.
I loved how AEW's version of transgressing on social distancing was getting the wrestlers in the audience to create some ambience and ultimately improving the show beyond what WWE's done. And then WWE was like, we need a bunch of pricks for Gronk to fall on.
It's hideous.
Can you not have had an audience instead? Can you not have had an audience instead, for Christ's sake? Anyway.
It's hideous.
Right, let us know your thoughts on who suffered the most at WrestleMania 36 in the comment section below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And subscribe to What Culture Wrestling on either iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts from for daily wrestling podcasts. Plus, just let you know your thoughts on Twitter at WhatCultureWWE. Watch there, follow all three of us. You can follow Michael Hamflet at
Michael Hamflet.
Follow Michael Sidgwick at
M Sidgwick. That's MSIDGWICK.
Follow me at Adam Wilborn. Follow us all at What Culture WWE. This has been Get the Table. My thanks to the Dadley Boyz. Thank you for watching, and we will see you soon.